Tax cuts for the rich, the scrapping of a cap on bankers' bonuses, and no extra windfall tax on energy firms. There are plenty of headlines from Friday's budget that could hand Labour the next election. But be careful what you wish for. You have to hand it to this new Daredevil Partnership of Truss and Kwarteng for having a set of policies that will look and sound terrible on the doorstep, and which Keir Starmer will be crowing about when he makes his keynote speech at the Labour Party conference on Tuesday. But Truss and Kwarteng are not stupid. They've decided, after a few short days in office, to be the opposite of Labour and the opposite of Keir Starmer. They're willing to soak up the negative press and the bad headlines because their budget is geared towards firing up the economy and boosting national income so that we all win. A bigger, more productive and wealthier economy has the means with which to help the poorest in our society. It's like a business which is growing, one which is able to invest and hire more people and give staff pay rises and maybe buy a new HQ. That's what a growing, successful business looks like. A business that's shrinking or living off the company overdraft will be laying people off, cutting wages and dying a slow death. You help people by being strong, not by being weak. So this new government wants Britain to be strong. It's for growth. Labour is not. This new government is for low taxes. Labour is not. This new government is pro-fracking and pro-exploiting our fossil fuel reserves for the short to medium term so that we're not reliant on tyrants like Vladimir Putin for our energy. Labour is not. This new government is pro-aspiration and pro-capitalism. Labour is not. It appears right now that we've got our first Prime Minister since Blair in the 2000s and Thatcher in the 80s that actually believes in something, and she's going to put it into action. After 12 years of treading water and a disastrous overreaction to the panic in terms of the pandemic, we now have a Conservative government that's got ideas and policies that they will see through. Truss is gambling not just on the economy, but on her entire political future. At last, someone with courage in politics. Who knew you had to elect a woman to get a politician with balls these days? Which takes me to the cervix-free leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer. Mr. Middle Ground, Captain Vanilla, an eye-catchingly mediocre politician. The Labour right find him too left-wing and can't forgive him for supporting Corbyn, and the left see him as a Corbyn traitor or a red Tory. They say, don't they, that you can't please all of the people all of the time. Well, Starmer doesn't please anyone any of the time. His main selling point seems to be that he's not lots of other people. He's not Boris Johnson, and now he's not Liz Truss. But who is he? Well, he's the duplicitous political schemer who served in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. Jeremy Corbyn, a man who effectively sided with Russia during the Salisbury attack. A man who threatened to bankrupt the country by nationalising everything that moved, and who presided over a Labour Party that was so anti-Semitic, some of the most talented Jewish MPs in the House of Commons left Parliament. He presided over a party so toxic that the highly talented BBC journalist Laura Koonsberg had to attend the 2017 Labour Party conference with a bodyguard. And the hard left are the nice people, by the way. Do keep up. That was Corbyn's Labour Party, and Keir Starmer campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn to become Prime Minister, which, in my view, would have been a clear and present danger to our economy and our national security. Don't forget, Corbyn has always wanted to scrap nuclear weapons and refused to say, when leader of the opposition, that he would use them if Britain was attacked. So this country would have been poorer and less safe on his watch. And yet, duplicitous Starmer wanted him as PM. Why? Political expediency. Starmer is not stupid. In fact, he's a very, very bright lawyer, and I've got no doubt he's a nice man too. But everything he does is a political calculation, not born out of principle or conviction. Great Labour leaders of the past, Clement Attlee, Tony Blair, John Smith, Neil Kinnock, these were transformative Labour leaders and very principled men. It's my view that Starmer will say anything to get power. We don't really know what he believes because neither does he. But what bothers me most about Starmer is not his political expediency, which is far from unusual in Westminster. It's his judgment. His judgment in effectively calling for a second referendum as shadow Brexit secretary. Starmer was the architect of Labour's response to Brexit. It enraged the Red Wall and lost Labour the election. Love them or hate them, it's pretty clear what this new government and Liz Truss stand for: growth and aspiration. This Labour Party stands for whatever you want to hear, or at least the audience in Islington in North London, upon which Labour is so focused. If this was a true reinvention of New Labour, I would take it seriously and I would consider voting Labour. But I don't buy this. I'm not sure his heart is really in bringing back an aspirational Labour Party, and one which is financially prudent. Prudent, of course, being a catchword of Blair and Brown. Not when he won't condemn the strikes which threaten to derail Britain's economic recovery. And they've announced that they will reintroduce a 45% tax on the highest earning people in our country. A cheap political gimmick that produces scant dividends for the Treasury and which sends the wrong message about Britain's attractiveness for high flyers. I want rich people in Britain. I want them to pay their taxes here and go shopping here. We'll all be richer. If you think my view that the top rate should be 40%, if you think that's wide of the mark, remember that for almost an entire decade of the last Labour government, the top rate was 40%. Keir Starmer is not Tony Blair. He's Tony Blur. Mr. Vague, a grey, sanctimonious, pious figure whose judgment was wrong on Brexit, wrong on Corbyn, and most egregiously, wrong on COVID. Don't forget, Starmer called Freedom Day in July of last year reckless when Britain led Europe out of COVID restrictions. He called it reckless. He said that school closures were inevitable. And by the way, in terms of reckless, let's be clear, it would have been reckless not to reopen the country last summer. I said it, and I think I've been proved right. Cases fell, and since then, mask mandates, vaccine mandates and lockdowns are looking like the most failed public health measure in history. It's pretty clear that if Starmer had been Prime Minister, we would have had more lockdowns, more economic damage, and we would have lived under even more of an authoritarian state. When Boris Johnson made the appalling mistake of having 3 national lockdowns, for which I will never forgive him, we needed opposition from Keir Starmer. But to steal a line from the majestic Dan Wootton, he was the leader of no opposition, waving these disastrous policies through, which have left the country in the mess that we're currently in. The only opposition we did have was from 100 or so Tory backbenchers who threatened their careers by voting against their own government's plans. That is what political courage looks like. Starmer may think he's bringing back New Labour, but you can't make a souffle rise twice. A soggy bottom is a more likely outcome. And a final thought on Keir Starmer's judgment. He just seems to have got every big call wrong, as I've mentioned. Corbyn, Brexit, COVID, but now, today, add energy to that, as he announced his plans to spend billions on sustainable green energy between now and 2030. And not a squeak from him about nuclear. Why? Because his bonkers membership don't like nuclear, even though it is patently a long-term answer for this country. Germany, under Angela Merkel, scrapped nuclear in 2011, and how's that working out for them? Now, I'm all for a bit of wind, wave and solar. In time, they will be good. But Germany has invested $500 billion in renewables over 10 years, and yet they face a winter energy crisis. Renewables are currently unreliable, expensive, and have created the mess in which we now find ourselves. Another expensive experiment, just like lockdowns. Again, it's a question of judgment. I think the Labour Party shouldn't underestimate Friday's bold budget and its positive, aspirational message about Britain. God knows it's risky, but political courage is very often rewarded. A great mark of leadership. Fortune favours the brave. Starmer hasn't taken a risk in his life, which is why I don't think he will ever win a majority at a general election. But even that's a worry, because a hung parliament could lead to something worse. A Britain-hating coalition of hell, made up of Labour and the SNP, with a few Corbynite MPs holding the balance of power.